Our next speaker is a candidate for the Republican nomination to run against Sherrod Brown for the U.S. Senate seat. Now this is pretty big. Perhaps you've heard the administration is working on gun control under the radar. I'm not sure which radar that is, but I suspect it's ours, and let me tell you, we're looking pretty low. That's where you tend to find snakes. And we need people who are on our side, on the gun rights side, in the U.S. Senate. And Sherrod Brown is not on our side. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody here. The man I'm going to introduce is on our side. I've known him for many years, going back to when I lived in Summit County, and met all those years ago. But he's a good man. He's a former state senator. He is going to run for the U.S. Senate, and with any luck, we're going to have a real gun rights patriot as our next senator from the state of Ohio. Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin Coughlin.
Thanks very much, Doug. Thanks for the invite. I never follow a Marine colonel. I can tell you, I snap to attention right at the get-go. I'm motivated. My daughter Catherine is with me today. She's getting a little bit of a civics lesson on the Constitution. A little field trip for her. We were a little late getting here. We had to come through Canton and had to be extra careful. I want to, anybody know who Melba King is? This is a very old story, but, okay, good, let me remind. Melba King was a woman back in the about 1933 in Iowa. She was a nursing student, and she was walking home from school and was held up. She was mugged by an assailant with a gun, and what saved her from the attack was a man who was leaning out of the second-story window up above out of his apartment, and he had a gun, and he pointed it at the assailant and said, "I'm going to shoot you if you don't leave her alone," and the guy ran. Well, that young man was a radio broadcaster who was on assignment out in Iowa, and his name was Ronald Reagan. Now, 50 years later or so, 51 years, 1984, Ronald Reagan's running for re-election, and unbeknownst to him at a rally in Iowa, Melba King was brought up on stage to meet him again and be reunited. And he took that opportunity to let her and the crowd know that the gun wasn't loaded at the time. And if the classic Reagan, and if the guy hadn't run, the only thing he could have done was thrown it at him. But Ronald Reagan understood, as all of you do, that sometimes the best way to stop a lawbreaker with a gun is a law-abiding citizen with a gun. That's right. And he not only believed that and talked about that the rest of his life, he lived it and acted in that way. He understood and was deeply committed to that philosophy and to our Constitution. And it's important to tell those stories because I think it's often misunderstood what the pro-gun movement is all about, what the Second Amendment movement is all about, what organizations like yours are motivated by. It's not just about hunting and collecting and things like that. It's about a very basic inherent right that we as Americans have to own firearms. It starts with our Declaration of Independence that recognized that rights to all people in our country were granted not by government but by God. And later, when crafting the Constitution, there's a reason why the Second Amendment is written so clearly, so succinctly as it is, to say that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed upon by government. That makes it very clear that, again, this isn't a right that's handed to you by anybody. This is a right you already have, and one that is protected. And the founders set it up that way because they realized that they had, after the Boston Massacre, after Lexington, after Concord, they understood that the only way that they could throw off the yoke of tyranny was to show that the people were equal to that tyranny, that the people were equal to their rulers. And they wanted to ensure that future generations were equal to their government, which is why our cause is so important and why the Constitution is written the way it is. It's also important because we have a right to a freedom from fear. It is my belief that it is a basic human right for personal security. personal security is a basic human right of our person, of our property, of our businesses, in our communities, to be able to walk around in a society that is governed by the rule of law and trust in the people that we'll be able to live in a peaceful and orderly way. When I was a legislator, I remember all the heart-wrenching testimony that we heard, and you've all heard them too, from victims, from families of victims, people who were there during attacks, people who could have made a difference had we had a concealed carry bill, concealed carry law in our state. We've all heard those things. And from whether they're individual tragedies or whether they're large-scale tragedies, from Columbine to Tucson to Norway, what happens inevitably after every one of those? We have this huge debate. It provides an opening and a misuse of that tragedy by the media, by anti-gun folks, by liberals who want to take away those rights. And really, I think, misuse the tragedy and the pain that has been that goes on in the lives of others for their own political ends. We must be reminded, we must always remind people that we can never compromise those rights. We can never compromise our individual liberties because of the acts of madmen. At the end of the day, our Constitution is still there. And the fact is, and as we recognize finally here in the state of Ohio, that law-abiding citizens with guns can make a difference and can make us safer. Danny mentioned a couple minutes ago about things going on under the radar in Washington, D.C., and that's exactly where they're going on. And the reason is simple. Barack Obama cannot get an anti-gun agenda passed through the United States Congress. He simply can't. And so he's using different means. He's using the bureaucracy. He's using agencies to implement rules and harass folks. He's using judges. He's using treaties and international protocols and UN protocols like Agenda 21 and executive orders. And he's appointing judges that are anti-gun who will look at those treaties and recognize international law and international protocols in a way that has primacy over our national sovereignty, primacy over our own laws, which I think really shows why it's so important to elect the right people in 2012, to the White House and to the United States Senate. Those last 2 points in particular show that the United States Senate race is extraordinarily important. And for those of you who are Republicans, I always like to say it's not enough just to elect an arm. For those of you who are conservatives, it's not enough to just elect people who say that they're conservatives. For those of you who only vote on 2A, it's not enough to elect somebody who simply says they're in favor of 2A. We have to look very deeply at the candidates we elect, or else we'll never be able to roll back the agenda. We'll never be able to truly protect our freedoms. And one of the reasons I ran for office in the first place back in 1996 at the age of 25, and one of the reasons why I'm jumping in this race now is simply we don't have the right people. We can't just elect 12 or 13 Republicans to the United States Senate next year. We got to elect the right people. People who have core principles. People who have courage. People who have a track record of standing up to the party and to the establishment and to the special interests and to the media and saying, no, I'm going to do what I said I was going to do when I was elected. And folks who have a track record of showing that they can do that. There are too many job-hopping, flip-flopping politicians running for office today. And the problem with that is that they're the first people when they go to Washington, D.C. who get lost, who do whatever the leadership tells them to do, who do whatever the special interests want them to do, who do whatever the editorial boards want them to do. And that's what's hurting our country. We have to reclaim our country and get it back, and the only way to do that is to elect the right people. So I mentioned the Reagan story at the beginning. I brought that up for a reason because A, he's a person who clearly lived as he believed, who truly had the force of legitimacy behind him and a true adherence to core principles that he not only talked about, but that he lived. And he acted in that way, in a way that matched his words. And he understood, as you do, that at the end of the day, after all the shouting and all the argument, and the smoke clears and the noise dies down, just like our Star-Spangled Banner at Fort McHenry, the Constitution is still there. And it is our job as law-abiding citizens, as protectors of our freedom, to continue to fight for that and defend that Constitution and defend the Second Amendment, even when we're the only ones doing it. Even when we're the only ones doing it, because it is, as someone mentioned, our most important right, because it guarantees all the others. Thanks very much for all the work that you do. Look forward to seeing you again, and thanks for the invite.